There are things you were never supposed to hear before sleep. Something people in medieval life would have fainted over. Something the sleepless historian inside you has secretly always wanted to know. Across the world, across forgotten history, across dusty scrolls and dim candlelit corners of world history, people didn't always touch, love, desire, or marry the way you and I understand it today. Some of their customs, oh, if you told them to a medieval monk, it would have sent him running straight into the nearest river for purification. But tonight, you're safe, wrapped in your blanket, breathing slowly. And I'm going to tell you the most shocking sexual practices in history, softly, gently, like a bedtime story that was never meant for children. Only for curious grown-ups who listen with the lights low and their minds open. Take a deep breath for me, in and out. Good. Let's sink together, softly, into the strange world of ancient desire. And don't worry, I'll guide you like a warm hand through a dark museum, full of whispers, not nightmares. Because this isn't about being explicit. It's about understanding why humans, from the calm shores of the Pacific to the snow-dusted hills of Ireland, created rituals that would make modern society look twice. Some of these practices are tender, some are confusing, some are symbolic. Some challenge everything Western culture taught you about purity, pleasure, and power, and some are so bizarre, you'll wonder if boring history has been lying to you this whole time. Ready? Let's gently pull back the curtain. Let's start far away. So far that even your imagination has to stretch. Mangaia, a tiny island in the Cook Islands. Soft waves brushing the sand, warm breezes dancing through palm leaves. You'd think it's all calm, sunlit afternoons, right? Well, not quite. Mangaia held one of the most open, unapologetic, and pleasure-positive cultures in forgotten history. But the shock isn't in what they did. It's how naturally they saw it. Imagine a society where desire wasn't shameful, pleasure wasn't sinful, and knowing how to love well was considered a gift, almost a duty. In Mangaia, intimacy wasn't a hidden, guilty secret. It was a gentle craft, a skill taught with care, completely normalized in their adult world. But here's the twist. Because every shocking tradition has a twist, right? Mangaia believes something most societies are still struggling with today. Pleasure is not selfish. Pleasure is shared. They believed that giving joy was just as important as receiving it. Imagine that. A place where the best lover wasn't the most dominant, the strongest, or the most handsome, but the most attentive. You can hear it, right? The quiet gasp of someone living in medieval history whispering, "Impossible." But we're just getting warm. Because the shock isn't the practice, it's the philosophy. Mangaia teaches us something modern cultures forgot. Pleasure isn't sinful until someone tells you it is. Boring history never told you that part, but I will, because you're here to listen gently in the dark. Before we continue, make sure you subscribe, because the next twist in this story will shock you now. Breathe out slowly. We're moving from warm tropical air to a freezing cliffside off the coast of Ireland, to a place so quiet, so shy, so deeply modest, that the very thought of sensuality made people's hearts race, not with excitement, but with panic. Innisbeag, one of the most sexually repressive cultures ever recorded. While Mangaia danced joyfully with desire, Innisbeag tiptoed around it like it was a sleeping dragon. Let me paint the picture softly for you. Imagine a couple married for 20 years, and the deepest intimacy they share is a quick kiss in the dark, never spoken of again. Imagine people so uncomfortable with their own bodies that even taking off a shirt felt like a radical act. Imagine being taught absolutely nothing about desire, attraction, or comfort, because no one around you had been taught either. No flirting, no sensual dancing, no adventurous romance, not even the idea of pleasure as something real. If Mangaia was a blooming flower, Innisbeag was a tightly closed bud. Here's the fascinating part. The shocking practice wasn't what they did, it was what they refused to do. They believed desire was dangerous, pleasure was suspicious, bodies were, well, something to keep hidden under wool. And you might think, How can two societies on the same planet live so differently? That, my friend, is one of history's mysteries. This contrast, one island celebrating pleasure, another terrified of it, shows something beautiful. Sexuality is not universal. It's cultural. And culture can shape desire more strongly than biology. Deep breath. Hey, if you're still watching, you're awesome. Please subscribe. Let it sink in. We're just beginning our journey. Let's glide now to Cambodia. We're moving quietly, gently, like a traveler passing through old forests into the Ratanakiri region, home of the Krung people. Here, young women had something extraordinary, something that would make most of the modern world raise an eyebrow, and maybe admire them too. A love hut, a small, private little home beside the family house, built lovingly by a girl's own father, not for punishment, not for secrecy, not for shame, but for freedom. Imagine being given a room, not after marriage, not after adulthood, but before, where you could learn, reflect, discover attraction, understand boundaries, and explore connection, without society breathing down your neck. The love hut wasn't about scandal, it was about autonomy, choice, and emotional clarity. A medieval historian would faint, a modern teenager would say, "Wait, what?" But the Krung believed something gentle and powerful. A girl should know her own heart before someone else tries to claim it. And isn't that beautiful? History trivia rarely sounds this soft, does it? But behind every shocking practice, there is usually a tender reason. Even the name Love Hut sounds like something crafted from moonlight and curiosity. And yet, modern pressures, modernization, and Western influence are slowly erasing this tradition. Which leads to a question, one I'll ask softly because it's a bedtime question. What happens to a culture when its oldest wisdom goes silent? Hold that thought, because our next culture answers it in an unexpected way. Let's travel to India, into the forests of Chhattisgarh, where the Maurya tribe built something that might surprise you. A gotal, a communal lodge. A place where young adults spent the night learning, not through lectures, but through shared experience. Soft music, dancing, laughter, stories passed down through generations. The Go-Tool was an important tradition. It taught grace, cooperation, responsibility, and respect. Respect is the key word here. Contrary to what outsiders might assume, the shocking part wasn't the closeness. It was the rule that governed the entire tradition. Consent. Clear, unquestioned, absolute consent. A girl had the final say. Always. This wasn't a society of chaos. It was a society of structure and understanding. It turns our modern judgment upside down, doesn't it? In boring history lectures, cultures like the Maurya are often described as primitive, but their understanding of autonomy was far ahead of many medieval kingdoms. You see it now, right? The pattern? The most shocking sexual practices in history are often shocking because they challenge our assumptions, not because they were shameful to the people who lived them. And that brings us to the next mystery. One wrapped in moonlit lakes and matriarchal power, Lugu Lake, China. Home of the Mosuo, one of the last true matriarchal societies in the world. Here, women hold the lineage, women shape the home, women choose their lovers, and there is no marriage as the world knows it. Instead, there is Zuhun, the walking marriage. A woman may welcome her lover into her room at night, and he must walk home in the morning. No moving in, no shared property, no binding contract, no till death do us part. Only choice. Ongoing choice. Every day. Shocking, isn't it? Not because it is wild, but because it is the opposite of possession. In the West, marriage historically meant control. In some cultures, it meant obligation. In others, it meant stability. But the Mosuo created a world where love is renewed each night, not locked. Imagine the drama that medieval life would have written about them. Women running the world, men walking home at dawn, children belonging to the mother's line. Yet this system worked. It worked beautifully. Children were raised in big, supportive households. Women were free. Men were involved but not bound. This society flipped the script. And in doing so, they taught us something simple and profound. Love doesn't need ownership. Sometimes love simply needs space. Another deep breath. We're halfway through our 5,000 words. But the story is only getting darker, stranger, and more mysterious from here. Because now, we are leaving the gentle traditions and walking straight into history's shadows. Before we go deeper, I want to whisper a question into your ear. What if the shocking practices in history aren't shocking because they are weird, but because they expose the secret beliefs we still carry today? What if the things we call strange history are actually reflections of our own desires, fears, and contradictions? That's the twist, the cliffhanger, the moment of realization. History isn't weird. Humans are. And that includes us. Now let's turn the page, slowly, carefully, because we're about to dive into the darkest, most misunderstood corners of desire. Not explicit, not graphic, just psychological, symbolic, cultural, and deeply human. Ready? Hold my voice. We're going in. Let's move to rural Austria now, to a tradition that sounds strange, but when you peel back the symbolism, it becomes surprisingly sweet. Young women would dance with slices of apples tucked beneath their arms, yes, the armpit. And afterward, they would offer those scented apples to a man they admired. Now, your modern mind says, what? Why? How? But focus gently with me, because the shock here isn't physical, it's symbolic. In many old European traditions, scent was a declaration of interest. Perfumes were rare, baths were limited, scent was intimate. Giving someone a piece of fruit carrying your personal scent was like saying softly, I choose you, I trust you, I invite you. It was bold, tender, culturally powerful, and somehow, in the long river of boring history, this tradition got reduced to a footnote. But here, tonight, it becomes something else. A reminder that desire has always had a language, even if the grammar has changed. Let's climb into the Himalayas, not for the view, but for a tradition rooted not in lust, but in logic. In some Nepali communities, brothers shared a wife. Yes, shocking. But listen closely. This wasn't about pleasure. It wasn't about exotic desire. It was about land. In the mountains, farmland is scarce. If every brother married separately, the land would be divided into smaller and smaller pieces until no one could survive. So families came up with a solution. One wife, many husbands, one unified home. Strange? Yes. Immoral? Not in their eyes. It was survival shaped into a social system. Love became collective. Stability became shared. Marriage became a family strategy. And suddenly, what seemed shocking becomes clever, practical, human. Forgotten history is full of these quiet revelations. Now let's enter West Africa, into the world of the Wodabe, where men adorn themselves in dazzling makeup, bright costumes, and perform hypnotic dances, all to attract women, even married ones. At the Garawal festival, a woman may choose another man, and if the elopement goes undetected, the pairing becomes socially accepted. Shocking? Oh yes. But here's the real twist. It is the women who choose. It is the women who watch the men compete. It is the women who decide. Beauty, in this culture, is not feminine. It is masculine. Imagine a medieval knight hearing that. His armor would rust instantly. The Wodabe remind us of a powerful truth we often forget. Beauty standards are invented, gender roles are invented, desire is invented, and history keeps reinventing them. Let's glide into ancient Egypt now, where the sacred and the sensual lived side by side. The Nile was life, water, fertility, renewal. And one ancient myth told that the river's rhythm echoed the creative power of a god. This wasn't graphic, it was symbolic, a poetic way to explain nature's cycles. Egyptians saw creation not as sin, but as divine energy flowing through the world. Their temples, art, and stories were filled with metaphors, life blooming from touch, renewal rising from union. Tonight, in your quiet room, you may realize something. Ancient people were not naive. They were expressive in ways we forgot. Medieval history often erased the sensuality of older cultures out of discomfort, but the symbols remain. Greece, a land of philosophers, myths, epics, democracy, and a highly structured, symbolic understanding of desire. What outsiders call shocking, Greeks saw as a reflection of hierarchy, status, and learning. They believed intimacy should reflect power structures, not romance, not passion, power. The real scandal in their eyes wasn't unconventional relationships, but relationships between equals. Why? Because equality challenged order, challenged masculinity, challenged control. The more you study ancient sexuality, the more you realize something astonishing. Every culture is less afraid of sex than it is of losing control. And that fear shapes history more than desire ever did. Put a hand on your chest. Feel your breath. Let me tell you something quietly, lovingly. These practices aren't really about sex. They are about people trying to understand themselves, trying to survive, trying to love, trying to belong, trying to express something tender, something confusing, something powerful. The shock is not in the acts, but in the cultural stories behind them. Mangaya teaches joy, Inisbig teaches fear, the Kriung teach autonomy, the Muria teach consent, the Mosuo teach freedom, Austria teaches symbolism, the Wadabe teach beauty, Nepal teaches practicality, Egypt teaches mythology, Greece teaches power. Every one of them is a mirror held up to humanity, and when you look into that mirror, softly, gently, you may see parts of yourself too. If this journey stirred something in you, curiosity, wonder, confusion, fascination, then keep going. Don't let boring history textbooks rob you of the richness of human experience. Explore world history. Ask questions. Challenge assumptions. Remember that normal is always changing. And if you're still awake, just barely, then whisper back to me. Tell me more. Because this is only part 1. And the next chapters, oh, they get stranger, deeper, darker, and even more revealing. But for now, close your eyes. Sink into your pillow. Let the stories settle. Before we go deeper, I want you to breathe slowly with me again. In and out. Good. Now listen closely. Some sexual traditions survived thousands of years. Others disappeared overnight, swallowed by colonialism, religion, modernization, or simple embarrassment. But here's the strange, almost magical truth. The practices societies hide the most are the ones that reveal the most about them. Think about it. Why do cultures hide pleasure? Why do we bury desire under shame? Why do we rename, reframe, deny, destroy, and censor anything that feels too real? Because desire is powerful, desire is political, desire is dangerous. Even boring history couldn't hide that. So the most shocking sexual practices in history aren't shocking because they're wild, but because they expose the vulnerable, unpolished, unfiltered face of a society. Tonight we're going to explore those secret corners, but slowly, gently, like someone tiptoeing through a forbidden archive with only a candle to guide them. Let's drift to medieval life now. Cold stone walls, monasteries echoing with silence, villages coated in frost, priests preaching purity, lords enforcing order. But beneath that rigid exterior, a world bubbling with secret rituals and private contradictions. Medieval Europe publicly condemned sensuality, but privately, they were fascinated by it. Monks wrote moral sermons about temptation while hiding forbidden texts in back rooms. Artists painted symbolic sensuality into church decor using fruits, vines, flowers, and geometric curves. And ordinary people, simple villagers, carried ancient pagan beliefs deep in their hearts. They believed softly, secretly. Certain plants increased attraction, moon phases affected desire, fertility festivals brought luck, certain dances encouraged romance, certain colors invited affection. Medieval life was a tug of war between body and belief. And the shock isn't that these practices existed. It's that medieval history books hid them so well. Let me tell you one of the gentler mysteries. You've probably seen paintings of a maypole, a tall wooden pole, ribbons floating, dancers circling it. To modern eyes, it looks like a harmless spring festival, but its roots? Oh, they're far older, far more symbolic, far more connected to ancient ideas of fertility and renewal. This wasn't about scandal. It was about blessing the land, about honoring cycles, about celebrating warmth after a long winter. Dancing around the maypole wasn't a sexual act, but it was a symbolic one, a communal ritual to welcome life back into the soil. Strange history always surprises us like that. The innocent becomes symbolic, and the symbolic becomes misunderstood. The same way love huts aren't about wildness, they're about autonomy. The same way walking marriages aren't about infidelity, they're about freedom. The same way armpit apples weren't about shock, they were about scent and sincerity. Every tradition has layers, and tonight, we keep peeling them back softly. Let's float into the warm colors and soft shadows of Renaissance Europe. Artists painted bodies, not to provoke, but to understand. This is where the world rediscovered something forgotten during the darker medieval centuries. The body is not shameful. The body is beautiful. Michelangelo sculpted marble figures with such reverence that even their posture whispered human emotion. Botticelli painted Venus rising from the sea, not as a scandal, but as a symbol of divine beauty. Leonardo explored the curves, symmetry, and softness of the human form not to excite, but to decode the mathematics of life. This was sensuality as philosophy, sensuality as geometry, sensuality as divine balance. And in a strange way, this was one of history's most shocking sexual revolutions, the realization that the human body itself is art. Even the sleepless historian inside you must feel that. Because, in your quiet room as you listen to my voice, you understand something. We have forgotten how to admire without objectifying, how to appreciate without consuming, how to see without judging. The Renaissance remembered, and they left clues for us to rediscover tonight. Let's travel now to Japan, not to the modern buzzing cities, but to the old wooden tea houses, dim lanterns glowing in amber hues, the soft rustle of silk. Here, sensuality was intertwined with discipline, etiquette, and aesthetics. The shocking part? Nothing was crude, nothing was careless. Desire was treated with the same precision as calligraphy. In classical Japan, attraction was expressed through letters, desire through poetry, longing through perfume, romance through layered clothing, intimacy through subtle gestures. The Heian court believed that beauty wasn't a surface. It was a performance, a ritual, a kind of spiritual choreography. They created elaborate customs for courtship, where every fold of silk carried meaning. Imagine writing a poem to someone with one simple metaphor and knowing they would understand exactly what you meant. Imagine scenting your sleeve with a specific perfume because you knew the person you admired would recognize it instantly. Imagine romance as an art form, not a rush. Modernity rarely gives us that kind of slowness. But tonight, you get to feel it again in this soft narration. Across many parts of Africa, tradition intertwined sensuality with music, rhythm, and celebration. Let me take you softly into one of the most fascinating elements of world history, courtship dances. These were not wild displays. They were controlled, symbolic, intentional. Every movement meant something. In some cultures, a tilt of the head signaled interest. A particular foot pattern meant invitation. Specific hand gestures meant acceptance. Synchronized steps symbolized harmony. Eye contact held power. These dances were vibrant, expressive, and honest. And here's the shocking part. There was no shame, no secrecy, no hiding. Desire was not a shadow. It was music. Compare that to medieval life where even speaking about attraction was scandalous. See how cultures shape desire differently? Tonight, lying in your bed surrounded by silence, you may feel something warm in your chest. Humans everywhere, across time, across continents, have tried to express affection in ways that feel natural to them. But what feels natural to one society may feel shocking to another. That's the beauty of strange history. Let's glide into the rich, fragrant world of the medieval Islamic Golden Age, a time of poetry, mathematics, astronomy, medicine, and quietly, deep philosophical writing about love. The shocking part? They were far more open-minded than Victorian Europe, and far more articulate about desire than many modern societies. Their poets wrote of longing like thirst, of beauty like sacred geometry, of attraction as divine mathematics, of affection as both emotional and spiritual. Desire wasn't sinful. It was part of the architecture of the soul. Ibn Hazm's The Ring of the Dove is one of the most beautiful treatises ever written about love. Gentle, thoughtful, psychological, nothing explicit, everything emotional. He described The first moment of attraction, the pain of absence, the sweetness of reunion, the complexity of jealousy, the joy of mutual affection. Not scandalous, not vulgar, just human. Sometimes the most shocking historical discoveries are the ones that reveal how similar we are to the people who lived 1,000 years ago. Let's move now to the Amazon rainforest, to indigenous communities whose traditions were rooted in nature. In many tribes, body paint symbolized readiness for partnership, feathers represented romantic achievement, dances demonstrated compatibility, shared food expressed interest, storytelling around the fire bound hearts together. What outsiders might call strange customs were really deeply emotional, deeply spiritual, deeply communal expressions of love and connection. Humans here believed something profound. Love is a ceremony, not a secret, not a sin, a ceremony. Imagine living in a world where attraction wasn't forbidden, but celebrated like rainfall, where the community honored your feelings instead of silencing them. That's the kind of world many ancient cultures lived in. And tonight, as your eyes grow heavier, you're beginning to see how much richer, more colorful, more emotionally intelligent history truly is. Let me tell you something softly. Every shocking practice in history comes down to one of four things. 1. Survival, like polyandry in Nepal to protect farmland. 2. Social structure, like walking marriages in the Mosuo world. 3. Spiritual symbolism, like the Maypole or Egyptian myths. 4. Emotional expression, like Japanese poetry or African courtship dances. This means something that should comfort you. Nothing humans did was random. Everything had a reason. We judge the past through modern eyes and forget the past saw the world differently. What feels strange to you felt normal to them, and what feels normal to you would shock someone from medieval life so deeply they'd probably drop their candle. Humans have always been weird, inventive, contradictory, passionate, fearful, creative, and that's why history is not boring, not at all. Boring history is just badly told history. You, lying here tonight, listening softly, you're hearing the real version. You may wonder, why did some cultures celebrate desire while others buried it? Here is the quiet answer. Taboo exists to protect something, or to control it. Innis Beeg used taboo to protect innocence. Medieval Europe used taboo to control social order. Mangaya broke taboo to celebrate joy. The Mosuo rejected taboo to preserve female autonomy. The Wadabe inverted taboo to empower women. Japan refined desire into an art to avoid chaos. Every taboo is a story. Every taboo reveals a fear. And if you listen closely, you can hear the fear whispering underneath. What if desire makes us lose control? Humans fear instability more than anything else, so societies build rules, some gentle, some harsh, around the things that make our hearts race. You know this feeling. You've lived it. We all have. And that is why these histories hurt, or surprise, or fascinate us. Because they reflect our own hearts back at us. Let's drift into a more somber part of our story. Many shockingly progressive traditions. Love huts, walking marriages, courtship dances, sensual poetry were erased or shamed by colonial powers. Missionaries, governments, and reformers often didn't understand these cultures, so they labeled them immoral, or uncivilized, or sinful. But now, anthropologists look back and see something astonishing. The people with the most shocking sexual practices often had the healthiest attitudes toward desire. No guilt, no secrecy, no fear. Colonization replaced openness with silence, love with shame, freedom with rules. And the world lost something precious. Tonight, in your quiet room, you are hearing the soft echoes of traditions that almost vanished. You are helping keep them alive simply by listening. That matters, more than you know. Let me tell you a secret, a gentle truth whispered across all of world history. Humans create sexual rituals to make sense of feelings they don't fully understand. Desire is overwhelming, exhilarating, confusing, unpredictable. So societies built dances, ceremonies, huts, poems, symbols, rules, roles, myths to tame what is wild inside us. That's why every shocking practice is less about the act and more about the meaning. Tonight, as your breathing slows, you're beginning to see the pattern. Desire is a language. Cultures teach different dialects, and we have so much to learn from them. Before we walk further, take a slow breath for me, in and out. Good. Now listen carefully. Today we step into a different kind of room, not a love hut, not a go-tool, not a festival ground or a sacred temple. Tonight, we're entering the archive of forbidden anthropology, the place where old scholars hid the things they found. Too strange, too confusing, or too embarrassing to include in boring history books. Dusty scrolls, faded diaries, marginal notes scribbled by nervous explorers, anthropologists who wrote one version for the public, and another more honest, more human version for themselves. And we, quietly lying here together, safe under the hush of the night, we're going to read the pages that were never meant to be read aloud. Not explicit, not graphic, just truthful and deeply human. Because the most shocking sexual practices in history aren't shocking for their acts, but for the fears, dreams, and beliefs hiding inside them. Imagine a world where hunger, war, and illness were constant threats, where survival depended on unity, discipline, and stability. In such a world, desire wasn't just an emotion. It was a potential danger. Across medieval life, across ancient empires, across cold mountain villages, people feared desire because it distracted, it destabilized, it created jealousy, it broke alliances, it made people unpredictable, it led to rivalry, it challenged authority. So many societies built rules, strict, strange, symbolic, to keep desire controlled. Some banned songs, some banned dances, some banned perfumes, some separated genders, some glorified purity, some punished romance. Some viewed marriage as a duty, not an affection. But here's the quiet, haunting truth. The more a society feared desire, the more elaborate its rituals became. Desire, when suppressed, didn't vanish. It went underground. It became encoded in embroidery, jewelry, hairstyles, festival roles, color choices, riddles, secret signals. Imagine living in a world where a single glance or the way someone tied their belt could be considered dangerously suggestive. That was life in many medieval cultures. And tonight, you're beginning to understand how fear shapes tradition. Let's move deeper into medieval Europe's psyche. This is where contradiction becomes almost poetic. On one hand, the church preached celibacy, purity, restraint. On the other hand, Europe was filled with fertility charms, love potions, secret saints of romance, coded erotic art, symbolic fruit paintings, whispered folk tales, moonlit rituals. Imagine a culture publicly shouting purity while privately writing one of history's richest collections of love poetry. It's almost funny, isn't it? The sleepless historian inside you might giggle. This is strange history at its finest. The people who feared desire the most ended up thinking about it the most. Every rule was a confession. Every prohibition was fascination in disguise. Even the concept of the chastity belt, which boring history dramatizes, was less about morality and more about the fear of temptation from men. Stunning how often the story gets twisted. Now let's drift back to the islands of Oceania, a place where sensuality and spirituality were woven together like strands of woven pandanus leaves. In several Polynesian societies, unions were not private secrets. They were ceremonies, public, symbolic, and deeply meaningful. You might expect wildness, but what you get instead is discipline. These societies believed desire should be joyful, attraction should be honest, affection should be shared, and partnerships should be guided by elders, tradition, and signs. Imagine a world where elders didn't scold attraction, they supervised it. Where romance wasn't sinful, it was communal. Where love wasn't a private struggle, it was a village conversation. The shock here isn't the practice, it's the clarity, the dignity, the openness. In the West, talking about desire made people blush. In Oceania, talking about desire made people wiser. The contrast is breathtaking. Now we enter one of the richest intellectual worlds in history, India. Ancient India wasn't embarrassed by desire. It studied it, questioned it, documented it, elevated it into a science, not pornography, not scandal, psychology, philosophy, art, emotional intelligence. Text after text described how to communicate affection, how to read emotional cues, how to build trust, how to resolve jealousy, how to create harmony, how to balance passion with ethics. Desire wasn't chaotic. It was structured, guided, interpreted through poetry, theater, art, ritual, meditation, symbolism. And here's the real shock. Ancient India believed that love without respect was not love at all, a truth modern societies are still learning. Tonight, listening softly in the dark, you can feel how mature these ancient cultures were, and how immature many modern ones still are. Let's travel to ancient China now, a world of harmony, balance, and quiet dignity. Here, intimacy wasn't a performance, it wasn't dominance, it wasn't conquest, it was harmony. In traditional Chinese philosophy, especially Taoism, desire was energy. Energy had to flow. Imbalance caused suffering. Harmony brought joy. Attraction was a force of nature. Union was a merging of yin and yang. Nothing crude, nothing shameful. Imagine living in a society where attraction wasn't judged. It was studied the way you'd study music, or medicine, or star movements. Subtle, measured, purposeful. People wrote manuals, beautiful, elegant, metaphorical manuals, on reading your partner's emotions, calming conflict, strengthening connection, maintaining affection over time. This was history as tenderness. This was world history as self-awareness. This was desire as philosophy. And it teaches us something essential. Ancient people weren't wild. Ancient people were wise. Modern society sometimes forgets that. Now let's soften our footsteps and enter the ancient Americas, from the plains to the mountains, from the deserts to the forests. Across many indigenous cultures, romance required courage. Not the bravado kind, not the dominance kind, the emotional kind. In some tribes, a youth had to sing outside a girl's home. A woman chose her partner by offering him food. A man carved a symbolic gift. Lovers exchanged handmade blankets. Some communities had seasonal courtship gatherings. Some judged compatibility through shared storytelling. These weren't shocking practices. They were emotional intelligence in motion. Desire wasn't a secret. It was a rite of passage, a journey, a test of sincerity. And the real shock to modern ears is this. Many indigenous cultures believed you couldn't romance someone you didn't respect. Imagine how different the modern world would be if we relearned that. Some cultures couldn't speak openly about desire, but that didn't stop them from expressing it. Let's visit them gently. In Inuit tradition, a man showed romantic interest through shared work, quiet companionship, and endurance. In the Sami culture of Scandinavia, courtship involved handcrafted knives and symbolic reindeer herding. In rural Eastern Europe, lovers communicated through embroidered textiles, patterns that revealed emotion. In ancient Persia, desire was expressed through metaphors of gardens, water, and longing in poetry. In the Balkans, girls left carved wooden tokens at night for the boys they admired. These were not loud cultures. They were quiet, subtle, reserved. But they remind us, desire doesn't always need words. Sometimes desire is a glance, a gift, a shared task, a moment of kindness. And that, in its own way, is more intimate than any scandalous story could ever be. Let's step cautiously into the shadows now, not to describe anything unsafe, but to understand how myths were born from fear and judgment. Throughout history, explorers visited foreign lands and misunderstood what they saw. A ritual dance was mistaken for immorality, a symbolic ceremony was labeled perverse, a communal lodge was seen as promiscuous, a matriarchal system was called unnatural, a fertility festival was exaggerated into scandal. Misinterpretation created myths. Those myths became stories. Those stories became judgments. Those judgments became stereotypes. And entire cultures were branded strange because outsiders refused to understand their worldview. So many of the shocking sexual practices recorded by old travelers were merely misunderstandings, cultural arrogance disguised as documentation. Anthropologists today spend decades repairing the damage of those early writers. Because the truth is, most societies were not wild. Most societies were not immoral. Most societies were simply different. And difference scares people who fear they might be wrong. Tonight, you're hearing the correction. The real version, the human version. And it's gentler than the myths. Let me whisper something profound to you now. The kind of truth that lingers in your mind as you fall asleep. Humans ritualize desire for the same reason we ritualize birth, death, marriage, and harvest. To feel less alone in the things that overwhelm us. Desire is powerful. So we make ceremonies, songs, dances, stories, symbols, rules, prohibitions, invitations. We ritualize what we fear. We ritualize what we love. We ritualize what we don't understand. So every shocking sexual practice in history is actually a human being saying, I am trying to understand myself. Isn't that tender? Isn't that heartbreaking? Isn't that beautiful? You see now why I said this story isn't about scandal, it's about humanity. As you lie there warm under your blanket, let me guide you deeper into one last idea tonight. Anthropology isn't just the study of bones and ruins, it's the study of feelings, attraction, fear, shame, curiosity, joy, longing. Every tradition we've explored is a piece of emotional archaeology, a clue about what people felt, what they valued, what they feared losing. Mangaya valued shared joy, Inisbeeg feared vulnerability, the Kroung valued autonomy, the Murya valued consent, the Mosuo valued freedom, the Wadabe valued beauty, medieval Europe valued control, Japan valued elegance, China valued harmony, India valued understanding. If you look closely, every tradition is a love letter to the human condition, even the strangest ones, even the forgotten ones, even the misunderstood ones, especially those. You've walked far tonight, through oceans, forests, mountains, temples, festivals, villages, courts, archives. You've heard stories that textbooks hide. You've learned truths that shock not because they're scandalous, but because they're human. And now you're at the edge of something deeper, the psychological heart of desire. The next part of our journey will explore why humans eroticize what they fear, how power shaped desire in old empires, why shame was used as a political tool, how gender roles distorted love, why some societies worshipped desire, why others outlawed it, and how modern culture inherited these invisible rules. Almost every shocking sexual practice in history was shaped not by pleasure, but by power. You can see it everywhere. Medieval purity laws, power. Laws about marriage, power. Rituals about attraction, power. Rules about who chooses partners, power. Taboos about shame, power. Beauty standards, power. Double standards, power. Desire threatened structure, so societies shaped it the way a sculptor shapes clay. Pressing here, cutting there, smoothing this, hiding that. And the result? A million different rules around the world, some gentle, some strict, some poetic, some bizarre, some symbolic, some deeply moving. But all of them whispers from the same truth. A society's attitude toward desire reveals who holds power and who doesn't. Tonight, we explore that gently. Be still for a moment, because this chapter is quiet, intimate, and reflective. For most of world history, men held formal power: kings, chiefs, fathers, elders, warriors, landowners. And when one group holds power, they often shape desire to protect that power. That's why so many ancient laws focused on controlling women's movement, controlling women's marriages, controlling women's purity, controlling inheritance, controlling lineage. This isn't about shaming history, it's about understanding it. In many ancient societies, women's choices were restricted not because desire was evil, but because lineage was everything. Land, property, family name, title, political alliances, bloodlines. To protect those, societies built walls around desire. But the most shocking part is this. Even in patriarchal cultures, desire found ways to rebel, to bend the rules, to create secret spaces of freedom, sometimes through poetry, dances, coded gestures, symbolic gifts, clandestine communication. Desire is stubborn. It always finds a way. And that's why historical sexuality is never simple, never linear, never fully controlled. Humans always slip through the cracks. You already visited the Mosuo earlier, a society where women held the lineage and men walked home at dawn. But the Mosuo weren't alone. Across human history, matriarchal or matrilineal societies existed in parts of Africa, parts of Southeast Asia, indigenous American tribes, Pacific Islands, early European communities. And in these worlds, desire flowed differently. Women chose, men courted differently. Partnership wasn't possession. Jealousy wasn't glorified. Autonomy wasn't scandalous. The shocking thing isn't the practice, it's the logic. When women hold social power, they don't use it to restrict desire. They use it to balance it. Matriarchal cultures often saw less violence, less coercion, more negotiation, more autonomy, more emotional intelligence. Not perfection. No society is perfect. But the emotional rhythm was different. And when you compare this to medieval Europe, oh, the contrast is sharp as moonlight on water, which leads us to something deeper. Let me whisper a secret that might surprise you. Shame has shaped human sexuality more than desire ever has. Desire is natural. Shame is taught, and every culture teaches it differently. Some cultures shame women, men, pleasure, modesty, expression, affection, purity, autonomy, lack of autonomy. Isn't it fascinating? Societies pick the target, but the emotional effect is the same. Shame controls. Shame suppresses. Shame redirects. Shame creates silence. Shame builds rituals. Shame breeds contradiction. Shame becomes law. In medieval life, shame was a weapon. In ultra-modest societies, shame was identity. In patriarchal cultures, shame was a leash. In colonial societies, shame was a tool of domination. In puritanical religions, shame was discipline. But do you know the most shocking part? Shame often created the very behaviors it tried to stop. Forbidden things glow brighter. Silenced topics become more magnetic. Suppressed desire becomes rebellious. This is one of history's most psychological truths. And tonight, lying in your quiet room, you feel how universal this is. Now let's turn from shadow to light, because while some civilizations feared desire, others embraced it as a sacred force. In many ancient traditions, desire was a cosmic energy. Pleasure was healing. Union symbolized the merging of dualities. Rituals honored fertility and growth. Myths described creation through affection. Art celebrated the body. Poetry celebrated love's intensity. These weren't sexual practices. They were spiritual practices interpreted symbolically. For example, in ancient India, desire was a doorway to self-understanding. In Taoist China, desire was an energy that could be balanced. In Polynesia, desire was part of communal well-being. In ancient Egypt, creation itself was linked to intimacy, symbolically, mythologically, poetically. In indigenous cultures, partnership was harmony with nature, not sin. These societies weren't wild, they were harmonious. They understood something we now forget. Desire is not the enemy. Disconnection is. Now let's glide into one of the most complicated layers of human history. Desire wasn't just personal, it was political. Governments, religions, kingdoms, and empires used sexuality to create alliances, preserve bloodlines, control populations, define identity, enforce social roles, maintain order, justify war, mark purity, punish outsiders, elevate insiders. Every shocking historical practice you hear about has a political shadow behind it. Polyandry protected property. Matrilineal systems protected lineage. Love huts protected autonomy. Walking marriages preserved social harmony. Purity rules protected inheritance. Courtship dances protected community. Fertility rituals protected agriculture. Symbolic myths protected cosmology. You see it now, don't you? Desire was never just desire. It was the engine of civilization. And that is why history's sexual customs are so endlessly surprising. They reveal what people valued most and what people feared most. Let's talk gently now about beauty, a strange, shape-shifting concept through world history, in different cultures. Thinness was attractive, roundness was attractive, tall was attractive, short was attractive. Light skin was prized, dark skin was prized, large eyes were loved, Small eyes were adored. Wide hips were ideal. Narrow hips were ideal. And here comes the shock. Beauty standards almost always existed to control desire, not celebrate it. A culture might promote thinness to symbolize status, roundness to symbolize wealth, pale skin to symbolize nobility, dark skin to symbolize connection to earth, long hair for fertility, short hair for discipline. Beauty standards weren't about personal preference. They were systems, tools, signals, rules. What you find beautiful today is shaped by ideas hundreds of years old, and tomorrow, society will shift again. Strange, isn't it? The one thing we treat as natural is actually the most constructed. Let's return to medieval Europe briefly, but softly, gently, with the lights dimmed. In medieval life, purity was idealized, but desire was everywhere. Priests preached restraint, but wrote confessions full of fascination. Kings demanded loyalty, but engaged in their own secret passions. Peasants followed strict rules, but whispered folk remedies for attraction. The most shocking part of medieval sexuality isn't the repression, it's the contradiction. They banned dances, then created festivals full of dancing. They condemned desire, then created saints for romance and childbirth. They outlawed romance, then wrote the world's most emotional love poetry. They judged bodies, then painted mythological murals with symbolic sensuality. Medieval history is a maze of contradictions, but contradiction is the most human thing of all. Now lean in for this part, because it touches you personally. Even in the modern world, we unknowingly carry ancient emotional laws. Shame about desire, fear of vulnerability, anxiety about purity, insecurity about beauty, pressure to behave correctly, discomfort with difference, confusion about gender roles, fear of rejection, pressure to be chosen, fear of being judged. Where do these feelings come from? Not from you. From history, from medieval rules, from patriarchal structures, from colonial morality, from religious doctrine, from social conditioning, from cultural myth, from forgotten moral systems. You are not strange for feeling any of these things. You are simply human, and humans inherit emotional landscapes long after the original rules disappear. Tonight, in this soft narration, you're becoming aware of those invisible chains. Awareness is freedom. Now let's move toward the gentle side of the story. Many cultures used intimacy and attraction not to control people, but to educate them emotionally. In ancient Japan, romance was a way to cultivate sensitivity. In India, it was a path to emotional balance. In Polynesia, it strengthened community. In indigenous cultures, it taught responsibility. In China, it restored cosmic harmony. In Africa, it preserved communication. These societies taught something profound. Desire can be a teacher if handled with dignity, and that is perhaps the most beautiful lesson in all of anthropology. Your support keeps this channel alive. Please subscribe so we can keep inspiring together.